When I first got to NASA, I literally saw an invention that was basically a small version of the tractor beam. It was a optical tweezer that moved it on scale like it was in sci-fi. It made me say, wow, I learned that it's a problem, but it doesn't really matter to most people. And so this made me understand that patent does not equal riches. Most patents will not make money. That made me very curious about commercialization success and also the value of patents. I got handed a portfolio of 25 to 30 patents by the patent attorney. His directive was I need an answer on which one of these we need to renew within 2 weeks. I asked him my SOP for doing so, and he said there is none.
Welcome, everyone, in the newest episode of Talk IP to Me, the podcast where we try to make IP make sense for everyone. My name is David. I'm your host today, and today we are getting into the question that sits at the heart of every patent portfolio decision. How do you know which patents to keep alive and which to let lapse? Today, I'm joined by none other but Eric McGill, founder and lead analyst at Patentelligence, and one of the few people in IP who has screened over 1,500 technologies across NASA, the FDA, universities, startups, and tech transfer hubs. He's built a career at the intersection of patent valuation, commercialization, and licensing intelligence, and now he runs an AI-powered platform designed to bring rigorous data-driven decisions to support the patent owners who need it. Eric, welcome to Talk IP to Me. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on.
Thank you for coming. Before we get into today's topic, I really want to make sure our listeners understand where you're coming from because you have such a genuinely unusual background. So you've worked inside NASA, you worked at the FDA, you've had such a nice and interesting career. But what was your journey really like in IP?
I often say to everybody, none of us said when we were 5 or 10 years old, when I grow up, I want to be a tech transfer professional. We usually always started out in something else and somehow discovered this great field and ended up somehow or another working in it. My story begins in graduate school. I wanted to be a prostate cancer researcher. I was in a grad program for molecular biology. And I invented something at home and knew what an invention was, but I didn't know what a patent was. Serendipitously, I learned about from another student who was actually in law school to be a patent attorney, but working in the tech transfer office. He explained to me what a patent was, but he was auditing one of my biochemistry course. And long story short, I ended up dropping out of my PhD program to pursue commercializing my own patent. And that's what taught me the whole process. It took me 6 years, but I ended up developing the product, launching a business, proving it could sell. And all along, I knew I wanted to license or partner with a larger company. I ended up doing that. And then all the while I was working to build that company, I was working in the biotech industry, working for a molecular diagnostics company. I just found myself wanting to learn more about why some inventions fail and others make it. During that process, I went back to grad school and learned about technology commercialization and landed a job at for a government contractor who was doing work for a couple of Department of Defense labs. And that's how I got my start. And
Were there some moments in your journey when you felt like you've met with maybe specific stories or inventions that really shaped your thinking about valuation of IP or about how to think about the value of a certain patent or technology?
so, yes, that question brings a number of inventions to mind, specifically at the inventions I saw at NASA, some very groundbreaking, cutting edge technologies. As you know, NASA, they're technologists, they're scientists and engineers, and they're trying to invent technology to solve problems, mission problems, to put stuff into space. And oddly enough, I did not grow up like a space nerd, but I understood the fascination with it. So when I first got to NASA, I literally saw an invention that was basically a small version of the tractor beam. It was a optical tweezer that moved it on scale like it was in sci-fi. It was literally a miniature version of a tractor. It made me say, wow. Of course, I thought, well, maybe this has some value. The more we looked into it, this market was very small and other factors just didn't align, and especially compared to what some of the industrial uses were for it already. So long story short, this was a big wow technology when we looked at it, but the commercialization value was very low. But I'll tell you, the biggest one that jumps out to me was my own invention because it's my personal story. But I saw the problem at home that I thought everyone had, and I just knew that when I did this back in, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I just knew I was going to be by my early to mid 30s, retired on a beach, sipping drinks and cocktails, because I saw the problem that I thought everybody had, and I learned that yeah, okay, it's a problem. And most people have it, but it doesn't really matter to most people. There are other factors that matter that limited the market size, the situational usage of it. And so this made me understand that patent does not equal riches. There's a lot that happens in between. And also I learned the hard fact that, eventually most patents will not make money. More than 90% will not. The half that actually make it into the marketplace will never become profitable, right? So that made me very curious about like commercialization success and what determines that, uh, and also the value of patents. So it became a curiosity of mine way back, I guess going back 25 plus years now.
That sounds incredible, especially the small version of the tractor beam technology that didn't make it. Maybe it was just the wrong time, and maybe we'll see it one day commercialized.
Yeah, well, actually, there were companies already building their own little tweezers, and ours, because it was built, a lot of times when you're building out stuff for space, you don't care about the cost. So you're throwing all of the heavy muscle at it. And when you try to transition that into industry, a lot of times they figured out a way to do it more cost effectively. It was capable, but companies were already doing some of the same things with slightly different approaches, and there's a little more cost effective.
It's just so important, I think, what you bring here. And it also sets up today's topic as well, because the problem I think that you're describing, the gap between what the patent or the technology looks like on paper versus what it's actually worth on the market, it's just sometimes so huge. And sometimes inventors or investors do not really look into that. So that's exactly, I think, where sometimes renewal decisions or, idea generation decisions just or idea selections
Mhm.
go wrong. So when you look at when companies actually make renewal decisions, so already granted patents that exist, what do you see? How do they typically work?
So I would have entered in two phases because, of course, I come up in the government tech transfer world consulting, but towards the university, but then also a lot of our current clients are companies. Companies are a little more diligent because they have a bottom line that matters, but still, it surprises me. One of the companies I work for, they had a 100% renewal process. Some of it was defensive, but I think a lot of it was because of fear of missing out and also no tools directly aimed at this problem. So absence of some tool and the ability and process and framework to apply an evidence-based, data-driven process, I think the easy, quick decision is to hit the renew button every single time. I saw this when I was in federal government. I was working as a senior scientist in the molecular diagnostic industry, but I wanted a job doing technology commercialization. I landed one within a year of being on the job, still new to the field. I got handed a portfolio of 25 to 30 patents by the patent attorney. And his directive was, I need an answer on which one of these we need to renew within 2 weeks. And I asked him, I said, number one, I said, okay, your SOP for doing so. And he said, there is none. I said, well, tell me what the last person who actually had to make these decisions, what did they do? He said, I don't really know, but they probably just used their gut feel. And it made me get cold. I was working as a contractor for the Department of Defense and Army Lab. And I knew that the program investment on a lot of these inventions, some of it was 8, 9 figures. And I was like, I'm supposed to make a decision about whether to kill or keep this alive. And I said, there has to be some data-driven decision process. There was none. Obviously, if it's licensed, you keep it. If it's approaching the first maintenance speed, you're a little more lenient because it's a lower cost, and you still want to give it a chance. But I rushed to try to talk to industry, seeing if companies wanted to license it. And if they did, I at least want to have further discussions. We kept it alive. If not, the hardest thing is like saying, don't pay a maintenance fee because you think about it, if you're wrong one time, right? So just to be honest with you, I probably defaulted back to like, let's just pay them off. I don't think the burden of being wrong about this thing, right? So it may, but after that, maybe I realized that there needs to be some sort of evidence-based, data-driven framework and tools available. There are great patent analytics tools out there, loaded with information, insights that you would not imagine that you can pull from them. But a lot of them are ambiguous and they're aimed broadly at the field, and they're not pointing directly at this problem. Now, if you are unfortunate enough to have encountered this problem and also say, I don't really accept the status quo, and you've had the time on top of all the other responsibilities, figure out how to tease out that data in the data set that they provide, then lucky you. But most of us with our workloads don't have the time to figure it out, given the breadth of information, analytics tools, how to actually point it and generate the decision support that you actually need to make these calls.
It really sounds like that most people, at least in your experience that you met with, handle this process as, a checkbox. Or maybe it was just an administrative thing for them because I guess they were also afraid of, what would happen if they would let the patent lapse.
Right. And so to Army labs, to NASA, to the FDA, it was the same process. In my consulting work, I worked for consultant firms that actually did evaluations for universities, same process. When I would go to conferences where there are other IP professionals, tech transfer professionals, I would ask the question, how do you have this problem? Same thing, both industry with companies and also across the tech transfer community at universities. It's the same problem.
So after seeing 1,500 technologies and working at NASA, working as a consultant for the federal government, you've seen quite a lot. Do you have a playbook, a best practice that perhaps you have also introduced in a form of an algorithm in your software that you follow to actually evaluate a patent?
Our system that we've built, it considers 29 commercialization factors. Of course, some of those are more signal than they are noise, and we basically have weights on those, are the ones that are really true signal. It's a tool that basically looks at historical data for commercialization of patents, since patents, and it goes back to those statistics of 90% won't make it to market roughly. When you look at CLP, you can use it to look at the probability of an invention or a patent, given where it presently stands, to actually be successful. Also, some of those factors have uplift potential, meaning that they're tunable. If you do certain things, you can improve your commercialization likelihood percentage and improve your opportunity to actually commercialize and monetize successfully.
Before we continue, because this is really interesting and I really want to make sure I get it right. So you mentioned CLP, which is the commercialization likelihood index.
Percentage, CLP, commercialization likelihood percentage. Yeah.
Could you please give me a few examples of what are the determining 29 elements? And you don't need to say all 29, but perhaps a few ones that are very relevant or perhaps have a higher weight in most of the industries.
Sure. So I'll tell you, our 29 factors, they are not proprietary. The weights that we put on them, they are proprietary. We're very open about what our factors are. These come from landmark papers in the technology commercialization world, academic papers, MIT and Stanford studies, a number of other papers, but also some things just from my experiences by having looked at over 1,500 patents, going through a couple of entrepreneurial programs. So some of the ones that really jump out, obviously problem solution fit, does the customer really have a pain point? And then like market demand and market size. How strong is demand for it and the size? Is it sizable enough for you to build a scalable business around? Because you may have a problem and maybe you and 5 or 6 out of 1,000 people have it. I don't know if that's a scalable business, right? Also, we actually have a factor, customer discovery insights. You actually can increase your commercialization likelihood percentage by understanding and building what the customer wants versus building something that's slightly off what they really want because you build on assumptions. Do we look at a number of legal factors, freedom to operate, the claim strength, or organizational reputation? At NASA, we had people, unlike at other places, they knocked on the door asking, what do you have? What do you have? Once they learned that you actually can license from NASA, right? Not a lot of people knew it, but once we got out there, we said, yeah, NASA has inventions and you can license it. Man, they just wanted to see what you had. But at the end of the day, they did their due diligence and they had to really solve a problem that mattered to their business. So that's a factor that other people I've seen place a lot of weight on, the inventor reputation and the inventor organizational reputation. However, if you're dealing with very smart people, they're going to do their diligence. And if they have a solution that comes from a garage inventor that truly matches to their customers' pain points versus something that's cool that I can say I got it from NASA, they're going to be smart. And particularly if the garage inventor is really truly solving a problem and it works, they would take that invention. So at the end of the day, it doesn't make a deal happen. They don't bring people to the table. So that's an example where you might have a factor that could be misweighted in a lot of models. And also just another, I'll tell you, is the application effect. Technologies that sometimes are called platform technologies, they can apply to many verticals, right? But a lot of times when individuals or organizations, they develop a technology, they try to solve a problem to which there's no solution in the marketplace. And they tend to focus very, very deeply on that. They solve the problem. But a lot of times you have experts outside of that field who have other problems and they are trying to find solutions and they're really diligent about it and they'll look everywhere. They would contact us and say, hey, I just saw this patent. Can it solve this problem? And I would say, it wasn't intended for that and I don't think so, but let me ask the inventor. And the inventor would come back and say, no, it can't. But if you do X, Y, and Z, it would. And a lot of times that would lead to a collaboration for which there would be joint development to solve that problem. But the basis of it was in the original patent. Now, of course, there would be new intellectual property developed from it. So that's a factor. And a lot of times I think that this should be considered when you're drafting claims. You should have an exercise to say, let's solve this one problem. So you actually can wrap some of these things into claims in front. And so that application effect can actually increase your potential for success. And obviously it can broaden your potential.
Yeah. It sounds like, there are so many different elements that are going into that particular valuation model.
Mhm.
And I really want to bring it down to
Mhm.
a practical example. And I think in the end, you mentioned, when you just start an invention or when you are in a university, then of course you're not necessarily thinking about all the other factors that you mentioned. You mentioned market factors, you mentioned timing, you mentioned reputation, legal factors, a window of opportunity, lots of different aspects. So if I am, let's say, an inventor that started the research at the uni and then turns out there's some potential commercialization opportunity in that, what should be the first three things I should do?
But if you have a university, the first thing you should do is report it to your tech transfer office and then also see what kind of resources they have to support entrepreneurship. And a lot of universities have programs for their researchers and inventors to plug into. Now, the next thing I would say is the starting point for me, and I tell all inventors this, and companies, and other things I also mentor individual inventors having come up through that pathway. You should treat your invention like it's a business before you start spending money. Have same thing when it comes to making decisions around maintenance fees. Make your decisions evidence-based, data-driven, and not just on assumptions, based on assumptions. I have many stories where inventors basically had an invention, university or otherwise, and a lot of money went into development of prototypes and filing later to find out after they started getting evidence, whether they were seeking it or whether it was just hitting them in the face, that they were really wasting their money and their time, right? So I would say the first step is you really verify that you're solving a problem that people care about other than yourself. And also try to have some understanding. And I mean, right now, and we're living in the world of AI, and AI, when used carefully and responsibly, you can get an understanding of where to start. And this isn't verification, but it can give you some information. But true verification, you use the AI to just understand sort of what the market size might be. You start there, but then you go out and you verify this and you talk to people in those different segments who you believe the problem, your invention solves a problem. And this, like I said, this applies for university winners, or also individual inventors, or even in companies. And you get that feedback that yes, this is a problem, and you don't say, hey, I have this great invention. Would you want it? You basically ask questions around the problem. We see this problem, this X is a problem, and here's why we think it needs to be solved. What do you think about this? Is it a problem in your everyday world? You go back and forth with asking questions about customers, potential customers about that. But I think before you start, the bottom line is before you start spending a whole bunch of money in development or patenting, you should get some evidence-based verification that you're on the right track. You're not validating at the point that you're verifying by talking to potential customers, which, by the way, the feedback they're going to give you is going to help steer your development to make sure you're developing what they will use if they really want it.
I think that just brings it down so much to the practical sense. I've seen so many times when people are handling IP as checkboxes instead of actually handling it as a part of their business strategy. And, talking with people and actually translating it into business value. I would like to flip now the case and talk about cases where perhaps you've, went into as a consultant in a company and found patents that perhaps look really good on paper, but they don't translate to actual value. So what do you do then?
Okay. So I've seen that a lot as well. But I think that the first thing that you should do is when you're looking at your portfolio of your business, obviously you have to go back and say, well, let's just say it's been around 5, 7, 8 years, the patent. And obviously there was some impetus to file a patent. Most companies aren't going to just file it for a patent because it's cool and the inventor's excited about it, right? They have to meet the business goals. And you go back to the original reason why. Maybe it was to be a part of as a component on some platform. Maybe it was thought that it could be the foundation of a platform in the future. You have to go back and look at your original purpose and see how that might have changed, right? And then ask the now questions. I think that particularly when it comes back to making renewal decisions with your existing portfolio and the assets that are still sitting on the shelf, I think that approaching the negotiation should be a trigger for you to do due diligence, to say, what now can we do with it? That is evidence-based. It should trigger due diligence. The due diligence should have the goal of making a decision. Do we keep this going forward and continue to incur costs? And that decision should be based on, is there an opportunity now based on where we are right now versus what the original impetus was for filing? What is the true opportunity that's evidence-based? Are there opportunities for us to partner and hand this off to a partner who might be better able to commercialize it? And you go out and you explore those things. It should be a trigger point to actually cause you to do due diligence that will lead to either some sort of a deal for monetization. Maybe revisiting it will reignite some program that went dormant because perhaps people left, the inventors or whatever, but maybe there might be opportunity. But the whole point, it should cause reexamination, gathering the data and intelligence that'll give us the answers of whether we should keep it and continue to invest in it or whether we should not.
So what I'm curious about is, let's say now I'm a bigger company. I have the budget to use a software like Patent Intelligence. I put in my data, I get a CLP score for my patent, but then how do I connect that with my internal strategy? Of course, what you are showing me is based on evidence, right? So there is some, hard truth in what you're showing me, but there are many aspects that are coming from the strategy of my company, right? So how can I combine that easily?
When we look at our CLP scale, it's on 100% scale. Above 50% are in the top 5 to 6% of patents that have a chance to be commercialized. They're in the top 5% compared to lead all patents. So if you have 50%, you're in the top 5. So if you drop it down to say 30, you're still in the top, say, 20% of all patents. So I think you have to examine, are there things that we can do? Is there due diligence that we can apply, looking at the factors that are truly tunable to actually increase the potential?
And, it might sound like a crazy idea, but what you said to me really brought me to, the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, that is probably true everywhere, but that says, 80% of your revenue or value comes from 20% of your investments, which would most likely be the case when you look at your CLP scores from top to bottom as well. And what I understood from what you're saying is, okay, I have the 20% on the top, right? Which brings me 80% of my value. And then I only keep the remaining 80% alive if that matches my long-term business or strategic goals. Would that be a fair conclusion? And if that would be, then how often would you revise your decision?
I would say that's close. I would, the 80-20 rules, I'd have to go back and look at it more close. But it actually, in general, it's the same principle, I think. So the second part of your question, I really believe internationally and here in the US, there should be a quarterly process where you look at what's happening and what's coming due internationally, nationally, here in the US. And you run everything through and you say, and you get the intelligence or the data that you actually need to make the next decision. And then that next decision might be, we need to talk to the top 10 most likely licensees if you're trying to license, or we need to run these internally to see if there's an opportunity for us to actually create a product. And like I said, I think you should always go back to particularly when you're with a company, why did you originally come up with this? And the thing about looking at company portfolios and also a lot of university portfolios, these are curated portfolios. Money that's spent is a precious resource, and it had to actually get through some sort of process to get there. I tend to think that smart people made those decisions, so there could still be something there. I think that you do this process and you go back and you ask yourself the question, why did we come up with this? What opportunity exists now? What evidence do we have to move forward? And if not, that due diligence process should lead you to abandon.
Love that. Thank you so much. And I think that's also a very good last answer to close our section here and move on to the closing section, which would be the rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
One overrated signal of a patent value.
Inventor, organization, reputation. It probably knew that was coming.
Yeah, I love that. One question every IP team should ask before paying the next renewal fee.
Do we have strong evidence, a data-driven process, and information to support our decision?
I love that. I really love that. The biggest renewal mistake companies usually make.
Not using the evidence-based, data-driven process and relying on their gut, and they're missing out to make that decision. Like I say, also a lack of courage to, like I had when I was faced with that decision many years ago. It's that fear, man. Fear of missing out and fear of being wrong.
I love that. I think, fear-driven decisions should be like a very highlighted aspect of this conversation. It's just so important to understand what is the basis that you are making the decision on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, nice. So the last question of this segment comes from the last guest. And basically, she wanted to ask the question of, how good something can get. And we translated this into, when you develop an idea, then when should you stop investing more time into asking yourself, how good can it get? Like, is there a tipping point where it's going to get good versus you need to drop it?
Wow. So I want to give you your rapid fire answer. But that's a hard question to answer because myself being an inventor and developer, it's just a difficult thing to stop knowing you get it better. But I'll say you should not stop, but you should pause and transition from continuing to develop to talk to customers and learn if what you're building is truly what they want. If it truly solve their problem, and then also how they to learn how they want it built. I did it. It's you don't stop if you have something that you believe is working, but it's not going to be perfect for a long time. I think that's the thing you have to have in mind. You're a long way from perfection and the best that it could be, but you can't stay in the lab spending all your money. Most people can't indefinitely and not trying to commercialize. And you basically you not stop, but you start trying to commercialize that actually starts when you start verifying that what you're building people want and learn how they want it.
I love that. Thank you so much. And with that, I think it's time to close this episode of the podcast. Eric, I'm honestly and genuinely thankful for you to coming on and talk about how you've built the company, but also how you look at patent valuations and renewal decisions overall. I think a lot of inventors and IP teams will find this incredibly valuable, and hopefully we could help them at least with some knowledge or insights on how they should think about these decisions. Before we conclude the episode, is there a place where people, interested parties, can reach out to or follow what you do?
Yes, diligence.ai is our website. Feel free to contact me. Can be contacted directly at eric@intelligence.ai. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure doing this, and I hope it is helpful to other IP and tech transfer professionals and individual inventors.
Thank you so much, Eric. And to everyone else listening, thank you for tuning in into the newest episode of Talk IP to Me. If the episode was useful, please share it with a colleague, a like-minded friend, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.